Luigi's Mansion 3. Whenever people start throwing around wish lists for games they want to see on the Switch, a new Luigi's Mansion game seems to come up. Luigi's Mansion games are all about exploring a mansion and using those sick puzzle skills to move ahead. Oh, and you have a vacuum. That's probably the main part of the game, actually. Luigi's Mansion seems to be a game highly sought by fans, and it would probably end up being a lot of fun. But is it actually going to happen? We haven't heard anything about it at all, and it's not like a staple game on every Nintendo system. So are we actually going to see a new Luigi's Mansion game come out, or are fans just being overly hopeful, and it really doesn't have much of a chance of happening? Hello all 425 of you, I'm Redkwan, and will Luigi's Mansion 3 happen on the Nintendo Switch? Well, let's dive into the situation, shall we? Luigi's Mansion was the launch game for the GameCube back in 2001, and well, it wasn't Mario. Luigi's Mansion was generally pretty well received, but for Nintendo's big launch game, they might have been wanting something a little bit better. Nonetheless, it did sell fairly well, selling 2 or 3 million copies. The sequel, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, came out on the 3DS in 2013 and was also received well, and actually ended up selling better than the first game by a decent margin. Dark Moon has sold over 5 million copies at this point, although the 3DS does have a lot more potential customers than the GameCube did. So, the Luigi's Mansion series might not be the biggest Nintendo series, but it definitely does do well enough to make another game pretty likely at some point or another. But will that sometime or another be sometime on the Switch? Well, that's what we're about to poorly attempt to find out. So why might this not happen on the Switch? What could be holding it back? Well, firstly, there's the fact that while the Luigi's Mansion games do definitely have good sales, there are a number of other series that will end up selling better. Nintendo could decide that making Super Mario Odyssey 2 or throwing everything they've got into the next Animal Crossing game are a better use of their time and resources, and they might not be wrong. So the first hurdle is just whether Luigi's Mansion is worth making. Honestly, I think it does pass that test because the games do sell well, but it's possible Nintendo will have a game strategy with the Switch that Luigi's Mansion doesn't fit into very well. Another factor in Luigi's Mansion coming out or not could end up being that the first 2 games had a long gap between them, and maybe Nintendo will end up letting the series go for a while longer without a true new game. That could easily not be the case, but it was like 12 years between the first 2, and the second one might only exist because of Nintendo's Year of Luigi thing, a year which was probably celebrated by 5 people for about 2 minutes. So maybe the series, for one reason or another, just isn't one of Nintendo's higher priorities. They might not have many fresh ideas for where they could take it, and are giving it some time to figure out the best path forward for the series. It sounds like something Nintendo would do. And then there's just time. Nintendo wants the Switch to last 7 to 10 years, but if it really does, my Joy-Cons would be so broken. Am I right? Am I right? But in all seriousness, the Switch will probably do closer to their normal 5, or maybe it'll end up hitting 7 if they really want it to. But in either case, that's only so many more years for the system. I know I sound like I'm starting to proclaim the system's death before it's been out for more than a year and a half, and it does seem like it's got all the time in the world, but assuming it does last 5 years, how many more big surprises are we going to get really? We already pretty much know what's going down for basically the next year, which means we pretty much know the first 2 years of the Switch. Assuming there are 4 or 5 new Nintendo games coming to the Switch a year, that makes 12 to 15 more coming out before the Switch is real dead. 2019 is still sort of a mystery, but we do know that new Pokemon game is going to be coming out, with Fire Emblem and Yoshi probably highlighting the first half. Which means if Luigi's Mansion were to slide into 2019, it would probably have to be in the mid-second half of the year spot, or completely bomb as it tries to compete with Pokemon. Nothing competes with Pokemon, but that slot could be filled by a number of other games. Maybe Animal Crossing could go early to avoid being overshadowed by Pokemon and help round out the year. Or maybe Metroid Prime 4 will somehow be ready. The long anticipated and talked about Pikmin 4 also is more likely than Luigi's Mansion, I think. And Mario Kart 9 might also be a good choice to fill that gap, seeing as 8 Deluxe was a port. So Luigi's Mansion is possible in 2019, but I don't think it's likely. Which leaves the last 2 years of the Switch's life. And not only are the last 2 years of a console's life usually pretty slow, but they still have to fit in all but 1 or 2 of those games I mentioned, most likely a new Donkey Kong game, whatever Retro Studios is working on, and maybe a second Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon. Luigi's Mansion might already be running out of time, although they definitely could fit it in if it was a priority. That all sounds pretty gloomy, But that's the reasons why it probably won't come, so that's kinda to be expected. There still definitely are lots of slots the Luigi's Mansion can fit into, and while it isn't a guarantee, it is still very possible it will come. Fans are dying for it, the games have sold well, and Nintendo does realize that people like the series. But the biggest piece of evidence for it, I think, is the port of the original Luigi's Mansion to the 3DS. Why wouldn't they port the original Luigi's Mansion to the Switch, instead of the fading out 3DS? Because it's a handheld series now, and the 3DS is a true handheld? No. Maybe. But the original Luigi's Mansion was on a home console, and the Switch can be considered a handheld when it wants to be. It's getting a mainline Pokemon game after all. I think the real reason Luigi's Mansion is coming to the 3DS instead of the Switch is because Nintendo does want to do more with the series, but they want Luigi's Mansion 3 to come to the Switch, and they don't want a port of the original to undermine sales of 3 when it eventually does come out. So yeah, Luigi's Mansion 3. People really seem to want it, and the series has sold well in the past, and while time is seemingly running out based on my stupid method, there are still places this game could work. And the port of Luigi's Mansion on the 3DS shows that Nintendo knows people want the series, while also keeping the Switch open for a full-on Luigi's Mansion game at some point or another. But if that theory falls flat, then well, we tried. Well, I'm Redkwan. Where does Luigi's Mansion fall on your wish list of games? Do you think it'll come to the Switch? Do you have some actual good reasoning why you think that? Because I sure don't. Anyways, I'm Redkwan, thank you all for watching, and I'll hopefully see you all later. Goodbye.